Today on TimesCast.
Let us be clear, we are no longer talking here about politicians and celebrities. We're talking about murder victims, potentially terrorist victims, having their phones hacked into. It is absolutely disgusting.
Prime Minister David Cameron is under pressure to call for an immediate inquiry into the British tabloid phone hacking scandal. In New York, attorneys for Dominique Strauss-Kahn met with prosecutors Wednesday to discuss the future of the case. And the Roger Clemens trial begins, and a key witness for the prosecution is his former friend and teammate, Andy Pettit.
Given the gravity of what has occurred, will the Prime Minister support the calls for a full, independent, public inquiry to take place as soon as practical into the culture and practices of British newspapers?
This is Sarah Lyle reporting from London. Parliament held an extraordinary debate today about the phone hacking scandal, which spilled into a discussion of tabloid morality. The interesting thing here is that British Parliament, which has lived in fear to some extent of what the tabloids can do for years and years, has finally risen up and said this kind of behavior is unacceptable.
We do need to have an inquiry, possibly inquiries, into what has happened.
David Cameron's in a tough position because he has to denounce what the News of the World is alleged to have done, which is to hack into the phones of a murdered girl who was missing. But at the same time, his government is closely allied with the Murdoch empire. He was endorsed by their newspapers. He's very close to Rebecca Brooks, who's the chief executive of News International. They're neighbors in the country. They have dinner together. Similarly, Andy Coulson, who used to be editor of the News of the World, was hired by David Cameron to be his chief spokesman. When Coulson resigned in January, Cameron did a good job of distancing himself from the whole thing. The Labour opposition wants to detract from Cameron as best they can.
He made a catastrophic error of judgment by bringing Andy Coulson into the heart of his Downing Street machine.
One of the things they're getting him on right now is his ties to News International, his ties to Rebecca Brooks, his ties to Rupert Murdoch. And so he had to walk a fine line. He has promised that there will be at least one inquiry into this, possibly more than one, but he upset members of the Labour opposition by saying that the inquiries couldn't happen until after the police investigation was done.
It seems to me there are two vital issues we need to look into. The first is the original police inquiry and why that didn't get to the bottom of what has happened. And the second is about the behaviour of individual people and individual media organisations, and, as the Right Honourable Gentleman says, a wider look into media practices and ethics in this country.
And a look at the direction the case against Dominique Strauss-Kahn could take in the coming weeks.
This is William K. Rashbaum reporting for the New York Times. Dominique Strauss-Kahn's lawyers arrived at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office just before noon today.
We're not going to have anything to say now, maybe on the way out.
They spent about 2 hours meeting with prosecutors about his sexual assault case. The lawyers, Bill Taylor and Ben Brofman, were expected to argue that the felony assault charges against their client should be dismissed in the wake of revelations that have seriously undermined the credibility of his accuser. Last week, prosecutors disclosed that she lied on her asylum application and about being gang raped in her native Guinea. She also lied, they said, about her movements in the moments after the alleged attack at the Sofitel Hotel in Midtown. When the two lawyers walked out of the district attorney's office at 1 Hogan Place in Lower Manhattan, Mr. Brofman spoke briefly to reporters.
We had a constructive meeting. That's all we are going to say.
No decision is expected today from the district attorney, Cyrus R. Vance, Jr., on how he will proceed, whether he will dismiss the charges, as the defense has sought, or offer Mr. Strauss-Kahn a plea, be it a felony or a misdemeanor. One high-ranking law enforcement official has said prosecutors will be collecting more evidence over the next 10 days, and both sides are due back in court on July 18th. In the meantime, Mr. Strauss-Kahn, who is no longer under house arrest, is still a hostage of sorts to the case, and, perhaps, the media.
No, go the other way, and then when it clicks, then hold it down.
Yeah.
Push it down.
All the way.
All the way.
All the way.
He remains holed up in his opulent Tribeca townhouse, where last night, rather than being a prisoner, locked in, he was, for a brief period of time, locked out.
And the Roger Clemens trial began Wednesday in Washington. The former baseball player faces a total of 6 counts for obstruction of Congress, making false statements to Congress, and perjury, all for statements he made to Congress under oath in 2008.
Let me be clear. I have never taken steroids or HGH. Thank you.
Over the past several years, it's just been one star athlete after another who's run into these performance-enhancing drug problems. The one thing that sets this case apart is that a former teammate could be the one who is providing the evidence that is Clemens' undoing. Andy Pettitte, who was a World Series teammate of Roger Clemens and a close friend for many years, he's been called to testify in this trial because the prosecution hopes that his testimony will help them establish that Roger Clemens did use performance-enhancing drugs. He's widely perceived as being an honest, wholesome, kind of boy-next-door personality. He's not certainly someone that the defense is going to attack the credibility of.
Take me out to the crowd, buy me a brisket and...
Clemens and Pettitte, they were teammates for the better part of a decade. They were inseparable in the locker room and even trained together in the off-season. Clemens had the reputation of being the big, brash Texan who could do no wrong. Pettitte, somewhat more meek, conservative, also from Texas. He became Clemens' younger brother in many ways in the clubhouse. A lot of people are going to be awaiting that testimony almost like a car crash sort of moment because it will be so agonizing for him. He's just not the type of person who is comfortable speaking in this sort of situation, especially against his longtime teammate and close friend.